How you guys doing?
Good.
Right on. So that was just a little bit about me. Most people, when they look at me, they think I'm the epitome of health. And they make the assumption that I've been healthy my entire life, and that actually hasn't been the case. I studied at UCLA, I studied economics, and after that I worked in the financial industry for about 4.5 years. And during that period I suffered from severe adrenal fatigue and had a lot of health issues. So, the assumption that I've always been healthy is definitely not true. And for me, after I left the industry, I got into this business, and I've been in this business for the last 10 years as a health practitioner. Of course, to help myself, but to help other people. But let me just get started. So this is kind of my history. When I was a kid, I had severe asthma, bronchitis, earaches, lots of antibiotic use, wheezing attacks during sleepovers, really bad allergies. So maybe one of you guys can relate to this or have children or grandkids that have had those type of issues, and it's pretty tough. As I got into high school, I also had a pretty weak immune system. Whenever I would travel, I would get pretty sick and have asthma attacks, and I had really irregular sleep patterns. My dad can attest to this. It was always hard to get me out of bed in the morning. I was pretty tough to get me up. Inconsistent academic performance. Some days I scored really well in tests, and other times I did really bad, and I couldn't really figure out why. Inconsistent sports performance, up and down energy, really bad allergies. Then as I moved into the university level, I still had the weak immune system, pretty crazy sleep patterns, again, inconsistent academic performance. Due to low energy, I would take the minimum amount of classes, so I would sometimes take about 8 units, sometimes 12, depending on my energy level, so it was pretty brutal. One of the things that I learned is how to work smart, but I've never really, at that time, I didn't really work that hard, because when I tried, my energy levels would just flatten out, and I would sleep 12, 13 hours the next day. Antisocial and suffered from depression and hypoglycemia. Then when I started working, I was a financial consultant for 4.5 years at Smith Barney. Again, weak immune system, irregular sleep patterns, which is really brutal because I had problems falling asleep at night. And then, of course, working in the financial industry, you got to be there at like 6 in the morning, which was just really tough for me. Inconsistent work performance, pretty miserable social life, low energy. So I used a lot of stimulants to get by. I was using like Guarana and Ephedra, which are natural stimulant products. A lot of my colleagues at the time that were financial advisors were using tons of coffee. They would drink like 4, 5, 6 cups a day just to get by. I didn't drink coffee, so I just did the natural herbs. Much harder to gain muscle, lose fat, depression, hypoglycemia. So if you don't know what that means, it basically means I had a hard time regulating my blood sugar. And after being in the industry for 4.5 years, crashed and burned, left the financial industry on disability, and took lots of medications. So at the time, I went the whole traditional medical route and went to a lot of different therapists and stuff, and I was on different antidepressants, which actually made me feel a lot worse. So I left that industry, and then I started studying health, fitness, have a variety of designations and certifications that Wendy mentioned earlier. But over the last 10 years, I've really worked on my own health. So now I have a stronger immune system, regular sleep patterns, consistent work productivity, solid energy, and it's easier for me to gain muscle and lose fat. So kind of this, my history is kind of an evolution of physical health, and what I've learned through this experience and all the research and the books that I've read, and we'll cover a lot of that information today. You'll get a lot of that information in this lecture so that it can help you wherever you're at currently. Okay, so the summary of the lecture, we're going to start more big picture philosophy. So we'll talk about what is total health. Then we'll get specific and go into nutrition, grocery list, cooking, meal planning. Then how do you reverse the aging process? So we'll talk about toxicity, nutrient deficiency, and gut dysbiosis. I'll explain what that is in a little bit. And then roadblocks to success, physical and psychological. Just being in this industry, I know or realize that psychology is just as important as physiology. So a lot of people will stop a health and fitness program more for psychological reasons. And sometimes it's physical, so it really depends on what the person's dealing with. And we'll cover all that, so you'll get that today. Okay, so let's start with the first topic. total health, and the 5 dimensions of success. So let's define what success is. At a young age, we're groomed to be successful and to be the new generation to take our country to new heights of prosperity and greatness. Success is ingrained in our minds in school and culture and all throughout life. I was like many who defined success specifically as being material and financial. My value system was completely based on a world that would deem wealth as the end-all be-all. And in our culture, we would look to those who had great wealth and put them on a pedestal. The purpose of this lecture is to begin to look at the world from a different perspective, to begin to ask the questions that are different than the stories that we tell ourselves, to better define success in broad terms. Okay, so there's 5 different dimensions of success. So success, or true success, is one that's equivalent to total health. Total health has 5 dimensions of success that are important to understand in depth. So what are the 5 dimensions? They're physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and financial and material. So these are the different 5 areas that, when people are into self-development, they'll usually specialize in 1 or 2 of these areas. And it's better to have kind of a broad base and to push on all 5.